Hi, can y'all hear me okay? Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Jody and Father John, for inviting me to come speak with you all today. I am Caroline Scholl. I'm a licensed clinical pastoral counselor, and I'm a certified temperament therapist. And the reason that we want to learn about our temperaments is that we can better understand how we've been uniquely made. And when we know that, we know what our gifts are. And if we can quickly identify our gifts, we can turn them back over to the Lord and let Him use them. We also can notice those areas where we have room to grow in virtue if we know what our temperament is. So that's the idea of why we want to start to crack open what temperament is. So are there any guesses? Let's see, is this working? Oh, hang on one second. Bear with me. Karen, can you help me? All right, let's see if this pointer works. If it doesn't, I might just need you to click for me. Okay, so any guesses? Can anybody define what temperament is? What do you think? She doesn't know. Okay. Anybody else have any guesses? What do you think temperament is? Okay. We have treats. My two youngest boys are our treat deliverers. Any other guesses? Because that's close, but it's not actually what it is. Temperament isn't personality. What do you think? Awesome. A plus 100. Very good. So your temperament, I'm going to repeat it. Okay, wait, I think it's working now. Okay, got it. So your temperament is inborn. It's the part of you that determines how you interact with the world, how you interact with the people, with the places, with the things that you encounter. It's unchanging. So temperament doesn't change. And it's a gift from God. Yes, it's a gift. Some people may have taken the temperament assessment and thought like, oh, this doesn't really seem like quite a gift, but it is. It's a gift from God. And like we heard in today's reading, God doesn't have favorites. He gave all of us temperaments, our temperaments, as a gift. And so there aren't any bad ones. There's no such thing as a bad temperament. But understanding your temperament, it's going to help you discern what's the best career for you. What hobbies are the most meaningful for you? How you make decisions, whether you're more independent or dependent. And it also impacts your spiritual development. But it's important to know that temperament isn't destiny. Temperament is tendency, as she said. It's your inclination, okay? I'll eventually get this. There we go. Okay, so I said temperament is unchanging, but there are a few exceptions that are worth mentioning. And they're things that can impact temperament over your entire lifespan. So your birth order. Imagine that you were born the first of 10 children, but you're not a particularly gifted leader. You don't like crowds and loud noises. Chances are you're going to adapt because of your birth order as the oldest of 10 children and learn some of those skills that you're going to carry through with you over the course of your life. The other thing is learned behavior. Imagine mom and dad are both military, and you're somebody who likes to fly by the seat of your pants, and you like to sleep in late, and you have sort of a casual way that you engage with the world. You might learn a pretty regimented way of engaging with the world that you carry with you. And so sometimes it's interesting to identify temperament, and people are like, well, I don't do that anymore. I mean, I don't think I've ever been that way. But when we look back at what it was like growing up, you can see where they learned certain behaviors. And then the last one, which we're all called to change in this way, is through growth and virtue. So once we come to know our temperament, and once we come to know those areas of weakness in our temperament, we are called to work against them. We are called to grow in virtue in those areas. Okay, so if temperament is inborn, it's unchanging, it's God-given, the last thing is that our temperament is the source of obviously God is, but it has strengths and it has weaknesses. It has superpowers and then areas where we're vulnerable to kryptonite. So if we have superpowers and we're weakened by kryptonite, what does that make us? It makes us superheroes. Yes, superheroes. We were all given incredible gifts by God, and He wants us to use them as a force for good in the world. Who said superheroes? Andrew, can you bring us some candy, sweetie? So if that's what temperament is supposed to look like, it's inborn, it's unchanging, it's God-given, and we have superpowers, then what isn't temperament? Temperament isn't personality. Personality can change. It can change depending on who you're with. You might behave differently at home than you do at work or at school. You may behave differently with family than you do with friends. And so we can put on masks and take them off depending on where we are and who we're with and how we adapt. But that's personality. Temperament is different. What's interesting is that just because your temperament has a certain inclination, it doesn't mean that you won't ever behave the opposite way. So for example, I have a buddy who had me do a temperament assessment on him. And socially is how I know him. I know his wife really well. I see him at parties. He's the life of the party. He's a wonderful storyteller. He has everybody laughing at the parties. But when I did his temperament assessment, that isn't his temperament at all. He's a loner. He doesn't like noise. He doesn't like to socialize. And so that's an example of him having a personality and being able to behave in a certain way. And the difference between him and somebody who naturally thrives in socializing and finds it energizing is that when he's done socializing, he's going to be drained. So all of us can act outside of our temperament. So as I go through this, be thinking about that. Like, okay, this is a way that, I have to be a leader at work, for example, but my temperament is not one where I'm a natural leader, which is fine. But you might be exhausted after an end of a long day leading people. Does it make sense? Okay. So we get drained when we act outside of our temperament. So do any of you all know what the temperaments are? There are 5. Most of you have heard of them. You've probably heard of 4, but there are 5 temperaments. Anybody can name one for me? Choleric. Candy for the lady, please. Anybody else? Phlegmatic. Melancholy. Who said melancholy? All right, we got the front row right here. Anybody from over on this side? Sanguine. And who knows what that 5th temperament is? Who said sanguine? Andrew, come around this way, boo. So the 5th temperament, with the yellow scarf in her hair. The 5th temperament is the supine. And supine, medically speaking, means lying on your face, which doesn't sound like a really flattering description of somebody. Excuse me, lying on your back. Yeah, lying on your back. This is prone. Supine is lying on your back. And I looked up to see why that word was chosen to describe this 5th temperament. And it's because their faces are turned toward God. It's a lot more flattering. Their faces are turned toward God because they have the heart of a servant. And so we're going to get more into this 5th temperament. So if you took the temperament assessment, it only had the 4 main ones. It did not include the supine. So none of you got supine as your answer. But as I start to describe it, if it sounds like you probably got a score of either a melancholy or a sanguine. So just keep that in mind, okay? Okay, so this is a little bit of an academic way of looking at temperament with a graph. But if you look at that x-axis across the bottom, it's what you express to others. The y-axis is what you want from others. So the 5 temperaments have different degrees of engaging with the world. Some people put out a lot into the world. They initiate a lot of socialization. They love to make decisions. Others want a lot. They want guidance. They want a lot of affection. And so these are the different combinations that we have. And so I'm going to get into this with each of the different temperaments. So we're going to start with the first of the 5, the sanguine, and each temperament has a P word associated with it. And the P word for the sanguines is that they're popular. They're pretty they're pretty extra. Sanguines give a lot. They initiate a lot of socialization. They love to make decisions. They're very affectionate. They're generous with their affirmations, but they also want a lot. They want to be included in your plans. Sometimes they want to be told what to do. So there's this thing called the sanguine swing, where they swing from being great decision makers to really not very good decision makers, and they want to be led. And they also want a lot of affection and a lot of affirmation. So they're up in that right-hand corner. They have the highest of all of the scores. And so these are the superpowers of the sanguine. Sanguines are easy to love. They're a lot of fun. They're very people-oriented. In fact, being with people recharges them. They're extroverted. They move at a pretty fast pace, but they do have a short attention span. And then, just like any superhero, they have their area of weakness and the kryptonite. And there's certain things that can bring out the worst in a sanguine, that robs them of their superpowers. But instead of focusing on those weaknesses, I'm going to mention to you all the different virtues where sanguines have room to grow that will bring out the best in them. And so, I use the word virtue loosely. These aren't actual necessarily virtues, but just areas for growth. So sanguines, they love to light up their senses. They love delicious food and things that smell good and soft fabrics, for example. So it would be really, really virtuous for a sanguine to try to simplify, to be frugal. They love to shop, to be moderate, to be modest. And if a sanguine works hard at cultivating virtue, they're some of our greatest superheroes. Anybody know who that is? Oh, it says it. Y'all are so smart. It's St. Peter. St. Peter is one of the most beloved sanguines. And so what do we know about St. Peter? He was enthusiastic. It was at the Transfiguration where he was seeing God and Moses, I believe, and he loved it so much, he said, let's pitch a tent here. He wanted to just live there and live in that moment. He was so enthusiastic. When in the garden, he got mad and that soldier was coming after Jesus, he cut off his ear. He was very impulsive. After the resurrection, he saw Jesus on the shore cooking fish on a rock, I believe, and he threw himself into the water. So he was very impulsive. And he also caved to peer pressure. On Good Friday, he denied Jesus 3 times because he didn't want to be known as one of his followers. And yet, God chose him to lead the church. Somebody who behaved in that way, he chose him to lead the church and to be our first pope. And we know that St. Peter, he did work very hard at growing in virtue. So what does a sanguine look like who doesn't work hard cultivating virtue in their lives? And y'all sanguines, don't be mad at me. But it looks like Bacchus, the god of debauchery, of gluttony, of drunkenness, of sensuality, right? That's a sanguine without virtue. And then here are some faces of some famous sanguines you may recognize from pop culture, our parish. And so when I look at this, I see charismatic leaders. I see people who make me laugh, people who know how to have fun, maybe a little irresponsible and indulgent, getting into trouble, very sensitive. So how many sanguine superheroes do we have here today? Anybody brave enough to stand up? They're probably wearing very bright colors. Bingo! Anybody else? Stand up for me, come on. All right, round of applause for our sanguine superheroes. And so the next temperament is the opposite of the sanguine on that chart. It's the melancholy. And the P word for the melancholy is that they are private. Melancholies don't have much of a need to socialize or even be included in other people's plans. They don't want to be in charge, but they don't want you to tell them what to do. It's kind of a live and let live way of being. And they don't need a lot of affection and affirmation. And the superpowers of melancholies, I actually spent a little extra time developing this list because I counsel people who are melancholies. I'm like, well, God gave me the worst temperament. Well, that's not a thing. He doesn't have favorites. He didn't give you the worst temperament. They're incredible, incredible gifts that come with the melancholy temperament. They're very task-oriented. Tasks recharge melancholies. Who here likes to organize the drawers in the kitchen? Melancholies. Who here would rather poke themselves in the eye with the gadgets and the drawers in the kitchen than have to organize the drawers in the kitchen, right? So our melancholies, they're introverted, they're very self-motivated, they have a strong will, they don't cave to peer pressure typically, they move at a slow and steady pace, and melancholies have the greatest capacity for genius of all of the temperaments. Artistic genius, intellectual genius, just an incredible capacity. They're so gifted, they're very deep thinkers. But then certain things can bring out the worst in a melancholy that'll rob them of their superpowers. But again, instead of focusing on those weaknesses, let's focus on the virtues where they have room to grow. So melancholies can be perfectionistic. So they really need to be challenged to let things go, to be flexible, to look for the good in things, to be optimistic, and then to rein in their thoughts. They're such deep thinkers, they can kind of get sucked into this vortex. And so to rein their thoughts in. And a melancholy who can do these things, who can grow in these areas of virtue, is one of the most powerful superheroes. And if melancholies work hard at cultivating virtue, this is what they look like. St. John. And what do we know about St. John? He was so loyal. He was the only one at the foot of the cross, other than Mary. He accompanied Jesus. There's that image of him, I think, on the previous screen, where he had his head on Jesus's chest. I think actually Jesus said that he was his favorite. Or did he call himself Jesus's favorite? John the Beloved. He was trustworthy. Jesus gave Mary into his care. He was deeply poetic, so he had that artistic ability. He wrote the book of Revelation, I think, which is a very, artistic, symbolic language. And so what does a melancholy look like who doesn't work on cultivating virtue in their lives? Now, y'all melancholies, don't be mad at me. But it looks like Darth Vader, who was brooding and rigid. He held a grudge. He had a short temper. He was feared. And here are some faces of famous melancholies from pop culture, from our church. And when I look at this, I see loyalty, I see order, intelligence, serious, authenticity, maybe mopey. Mary Poppins was very rigid, but she was lovely. I love that Obi-Wan and Padre Pio look like the same person. So how many melancholy superheroes do we have here today? Are you brave enough to stand up? On your feet. Thank you all for standing up. Round of applause for our melancholy superheroes. So the next temperament, the third one, is the choleric. And cholerics like to give a lot into the world. They like to lead. They like to make decisions. They're happy to initiate socializing. They're generous with their words of words of affirmation, and they're generous with their affection. But they don't need a whole lot. They don't necessarily need to be included in your plans. They definitely don't want to be told what to do. And they don't particularly need a lot of affirmation or affection. And so what this ends up looking like, the superpowers of a choleric, is that they are incredible leaders. They're project managers. They're charismatic. They're organized. They're really disciplined. They have strong wills. They move at a pretty fast pace. This is somebody you want in charge of a big project. And what's interesting, though, is that with that characteristic of wanting to express a lot but not want a lot back, is they're actually extroverted introverts. They look like extroverts. They function in the world like extroverts, but they actually prefer the quiet and they prefer the solitude, and they need that to recharge. They're actually very prone to burnout. And so certain things can bring out the worst in a choleric. It'll rob them of their superpowers, but instead of focusing on those things, let's look at those areas where there's room to grow in virtue for the choleric. Cholerics make good decisions. Like I said, they're good leaders. So you can imagine it can be hard to be humble. It can be hard to stay small. So cholerics are challenged to work on selflessness, on tact, on patience, to guard against using people, and to really see people for who they are, to grow in empathy. And a choleric who can do these things is one of the most powerful superheroes. And if a choleric works hard at cultivating virtue, this is what they look like. St. Paul. What do we know about St. Paul? He was an incredible leader. He was full of passion and conviction. Even when he was persecuting the Christians, he was a really good persecutor. And then he had a conversion, and then he was an incredible Christian evangelist. And he continued to evangelize even when he was in prison, even when his ship was wrecked. Nothing got him off track. And so when a choleric truly comes to know the Lord as their Savior and uses those strengths for God, they really make some of the greatest leaders in Christianity. But what does a choleric look like who doesn't work on cultivating virtue? Y'all cholerics, don't get mad at me. He was an incredible choleric. He was an incredible leader. But unfortunately, his goal was dark. It was nefarious. So this is what a choleric without virtue looks like. But remember, the choleric with virtue. I see some of you sinking in your chairs. And so here are some other cholerics you may recognize. I see heads of state, business moguls, people who are independent. People who are independent and fierce. The words that come to mind for me are power and charisma. Maybe a little cranky and hot-tempered like George Banks. But like Patton, Margaret Thatcher. So how many cholerics do we have here today? How many choleric superheroes? Are any of you brave enough to stand up? Awesome. Round of applause for our fierce leaders. So the opposite of a choleric is that fifth temperament that I mentioned at the beginning, but the fourth one I'm getting to right now. The opposite of the choleric is the supine. And so when we look at that chart, supines desire a lot from others. They want to be led. They don't like making decisions. Decision-making makes them really uneasy. They want to be included in your plans for socializing, but they do not want to initiate plans. They need a lot of affection and a lot of affirmation, but they're reticent to give it because there's a big fear of rejection there. And like I mentioned before, if you are a supine and you took that temperament test online, you probably came out as a sanguine or a melancholy. So if this kind of sounds like you and you got a sanguine or melancholy score, we're probably headed in the right direction. And so what are the superpowers of a supine? These are such good people. They love to serve. They're very dependable. They're very tender-hearted. They're people-oriented. Serving others actually recharges them. They move at a pretty slow pace, and these are our introverted extroverts. They're unsure of themselves much of the time, so they don't look particularly extroverted, but they're going to be showing up. They're going to be there. They're at all the events. But they don't want to be the center of attention. And so certain things can bring out the worst in a supine that will rob them of their superpowers, but instead of focusing on those weaknesses, let's focus on the virtues that bring out the best in them. Supines love to serve so much that they have a hard time saying no. So they need to be encouraged to say no to keep balance in their lives, to define their value in the way that God sees them and not in the way that others see them. And through rooting themselves in their identity in God, they will grow in boldness and they will grow in confidence. And so a supine who can do these things is one of our most powerful superheroes. And if a supine works hard at cultivating virtue, this is what they look like. St. Joseph. And what do we know about St. Joseph? God appeared to him in a dream and he obeyed. He didn't ask questions. He obeyed without understanding, but he was obeying good, right? He was obeying God, who is good. He was faithful to Mary even in the midst of scandal when he didn't understand. He was that constant presence. He was very gentle. And so, A supine who isn't working hard to grow in virtue. Does anybody know who this is? Heinrich Himmler. So he was Hitler's right-hand man. He was docile. He was willing to serve, but he looked to a leader who did not have the good of the people he was leading in mind. So imagine had he been in the service of a really magnanimous leader, a really selfless leader, then the works that he would have done would have been good. So it's really important for supines to know who they're serving and to know who is leading them, to have confidence in those who are leading them. Yeah, so Heinrich Himmler, I don't know if I said it, excuse me. This is Heinrich Himmler is his name. But he was Hitler's yes man. And so this is what it looks like when a servant's heart goes sideways. And so here are some famous faces of supines from our parish, from pop culture. And the words that come to mind when I look at these faces is that they're servant leaders, they're sidekicks, they're helpers, constant companions. I have such fondness when I look at these faces, like Samwise from Lord of the Rings. Oh, so precious. But then we also have Horace and Jasper from 101 Dalmatians, who were Cruella de Vil's helpers, right? And Norman Bates. So how many supine superheroes do we have here today? Anyone think they might be a supine and are brave enough to stand up? Round of applause for our supine superheroes. Yeah, Nick asked if you can have more than one temperament, and if I have time, I'm going to get into that. I hope to be able to address that. So the fifth temperament is the phlegmatic, and the P word for the phlegmatic is that they are peaceful. And when you look at the chart here, you can see they're right in the middle. They answer sometimes to all of the questions, basically, on the temperament questionnaire. Sometimes I lead, sometimes I follow. Sometimes I like to make decisions, sometimes not. Sometimes I can, initiate. And what that ends up looking like in a temperament is these superpowers. So they are steady, they're peacemakers, they have an incredible capacity for attention to detail. They are the least likely of all the temperaments to struggle with depression or anxiety because they're just okay. They move at a pretty slow pace, but they persevere. And they're both people-oriented and task-oriented. They can do both well. They are both introverted and extroverted. They're particularly gifted at accounting, at research, at arbitration. And certain things can bring out the worst in a phlegmatic that will rob them of their superpowers. But instead of focusing on those weaknesses, let's focus on the virtues that bring out the best in the phlegmatic. So phlegmatics, they want peace and calm. They don't like stress and chaos. And so when things get stressful or chaotic, they may check out and take a nap. These are the people who love to sleep. They love a good nap. They're really motivated, quite honestly, by conserving their energy. And so the challenge for phlegmatics is to stay engaged, is to learn to balance work and play and rest and diet and exercise. They can be stubborn. And so learning to be open-minded and docile and flexible is really important. And so a phlegmatic who works hard at having initiative, finding things that they're passionate about to be moved to action is one of our greatest superheroes. And if they work hard on cultivating virtue, this is what they look like. Nehemiah. I actually had to look this one up. I didn't know the story of Nehemiah. Does anybody briefly know the story of Nehemiah? Okay, so Nehemiah was called by God to rebuild the city wall around Jerusalem after it had been destroyed. And it was such a huge undertaking, but he said, okay. He was willing to work. He was willing to keep going until he got the job done. Enemies showed up to battle them, and he very methodically thought through, and he took half of his workers to go and fight, and the other half keep building the wall. So he was able to make good decisions and be steady under pressure. So what does a phlegmatic look like who isn't working on cultivating virtue? in their lives. Y'all phlegmatics, don't be mad at me. Anybody know who that is? That's Rip Van Winkle. So the basics of the story of Rip Van Winkle is he got in an argument with his wife. Now, phlegmatics, they like peace and they like order. So he left and he went to the woods and he slept for 20 years. So a phlegmatic who is not working on cultivating virtue can look like that. And here are some famous faces of phlegmatics. When I look at this, I see inventors. A lot of inventors are phlegmatic because they have the tenacity and the perseverance to keep trying, to keep working, the attention to detail. I see wisdom and steadiness, diplomats, an easygoing nature. And so some of these faces might not be quite as familiar. So that's Thomas Aquinas, Marie Curie. Actually, I don't think I put her picture there. Sorry. Descartes, Tesla, John Cusack. So how many phlegmatic superheroes do we have here today? Anybody willing to stand up? Round of applause for our phlegmatics. So, fellow superheroes, how are you all being called using your temperament to build the kingdom of God, to be part of the body of Christ? Actually, the reading yesterday, I don't know if you all read the readings yesterday, but it was, he gave some as apostles, others as prophets, others as evangelists, some as pastors and teachers, right? So we all have a role based on our temperament in the body of Christ. And so who has the charm and the charisma to preach, to bring people into the church, to evangelize like St. Peter? The sanguines. They make wonderful preachers. They make wonderful MCs at church events. And interestingly, the Lord put St. Peter in charge. And like I said, sanguines aren't particularly known for their organizational skills, and they typically don't like structure that much. But the Lord equipped him. He equipped St. Peter because he called him. And so once these sanguines bring people into the church, they've captured their hearts, they've captured somebody's interest in the faith, they aren't necessarily the best people to educate them, to catechize these new baby Christians. So who has the patience and the intellect to answer their questions, to teach them, and to accompany those baby Christians through, say, RCIA? The melancholies, like St. John. And so now that the parish is growing, we have preachers, we have catechists, we need to fundraise. We need to build new buildings to accommodate all the new interests in a parish. We need a parish council to start initiatives. And so who has the willpower and the tenacity to complete the projects needed in a growing church? The cholerics like St. Paul. I think of St. Paul as a gifted preacher and a gifted evangelist, but the Lord equipped him and gave him these choleric gifts to use in his work of evangelization. And so now we're really cooking. There are lots of details to keep track of in this growing church. There's scheduling, there's mailings, there's bookkeeping. We need a church secretary to be precise and to have attention to detail. And so who's most equipped for these tasks? And that is the phlegmatics. The phlegmatics like Nehemiah. And so as we're in relationship with people, as we're accompanying them in the good times and in the bad times, we come to know what needs people have. People get sick. They have surgery. They need meals brought to them. They need communion brought to them at home. And who is best equipped to do these acts of service but the supines, like St. Joseph? So you may actually do some of the things that I mentioned, and it might be different from your temperament's tendencies or particular gifts. And that doesn't mean you're in the wrong place. That doesn't mean you're not being called to do what it is that you're doing. But the Lord does, because the Lord does equip those who he calls. But if you're not sure where to get started, if you want to begin getting more involved in your parish, a really great place to start is the gifts of your temperament. That's going to be the easiest place for you to move into a role in any group, in any community. But no, so for those of you who say are catechists and aren't melancholic by temperament, you might be an incredible catechist, but it might drain you more than somebody who is a melancholy who's a catechist. Does it make sense? Everybody with me? Okay, so how are we doing on time? Okay, so I'm gonna take it to the next level. This is gonna be like an honors class on temperament, briefly. If any of you have read the book by the Bennetts, The Temperament God Gave You, The Temperament God Gave Your Spouse, The Temperament God Gave Your Children, they classify everybody as having a primary temperament and a secondary temperament. Most of us are not a pure temperament. When I did the training in temperament therapy, we actually give people scores on their interpersonal needs in 3 different areas. And each of those could potentially be a blend of 2 temperaments. So there's a whole lot more room for nuance, okay? Most of us don't fall into those 3, or those pure temperaments. And so the 3 areas where I provide those scores is in the area of socialization, in the area of leadership, and in the area of affection. And so what that may look like is you might be somebody who wants to be included in all your friends' plans and is likely to have a party and invite people over, placing you as a sanguine in socialization, but you might not like to make decisions and you might not want to be in charge. And that would place you as a melancholy in leadership. Does that make sense? And then in the area of affection, you might be very comfortable giving lots of affection, giving lots of affirmation, but not really want a ton, which would make you a choleric in the area of affection. So there is a lot more room for nuance in temperament theory in general. So I'm just going to skip these because, okay. So you have gifts. You have tremendous gifts. You were fearfully and wonderfully made, and the Lord is calling you deeper into relationship with Him, and to potentially get even more involved here in your parish. And so how are you going to respond? That's rhetorical. But think on it. How are you going to respond? So very briefly, does anybody have, I can take 1 or 2 questions? Nailed it. Nobody has a question. All right, awesome. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. You want a mic?
Go back to the slide with the colors.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot. So I'm going to do this actually real quick, if you don't mind. Is this still on? Yeah. So I created a page on my website with this PowerPoint presentation, and as well as with like a chart with all the different temperaments and breaking them down by where they get their energy from, what careers are they best equipped for, what recharges them. So feel free to visit that. Those are there for you, and it's the Mary Queen of Peace page that I created. Yes, and the chart, all right, so the chart that I'm about to bring up is also on there.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. I hope that this has helped you answer that question of the month, who am I? So when we started out on this journey of gift, we talked about how part of growing in faith together it can look a lot of different ways. And one of the ways that it looks like is learning about each other and how God created us so that we can enjoy our relationships in our families, with our friends. So hopefully that this has helped you with that. So I want to, we're about to go on and transition back to having fun. But I want to tell you, could anybody tell me whose feast day was yesterday? That's right, St. Pope John Paul II. And you know what he said? He said a lot of things. Well, one of the things, I'm going to tell you 2 things he said. He said the human being is single, unique, and unrepeatable, someone thought of and chosen from eternity, someone called and identified by name. So that's who you are, created uniquely with your own unique temperaments. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you haven't taken the temperaments test, go home and take it and get together with your family, get together with your friends and talk about this. I know that when we took it, my husband and I, we had a lot of ahas. Like, that's why you respond this way. That's why you do this. It really helps unlock that mystery of you. So the other thing that Pope John Paul said was that we are made for happiness. I told the kids this when we went around in the classrooms last week to promote this event. I said, God's not boring, and he doesn't want you to be boring. He wants us to have fun. So part of discovering who we are is just having some fun. So we're going to go back to just having some fun. So what we're going to do now is we are going to have a scavenger hunt, but it's a different kind of scavenger hunt. Wait, before I tell you about that, I'm going to tell you one more thing about the temperaments. So it went away. Okay, so I'm wearing my flag. Can anybody remember what yellow is? Sanguine, that's right. I'm sanguine. I'm also choleric, but less choleric. So what we have outside when you exit the church, we have bandanas of all of the colors of the temperaments. And we want you to go outside and we want you to grab the bandana for you. So they're labeled we have 4 tables, so the tables are labeled with the temperament and the color. So yellow is sanguine, the choleric is red, phlegmatics are blue, supine is green, and melancholy is white. So find your bandana and grab it and put it on like a do-rag, however you want to wear it. Have fun. So, all right, so back to our scavenger hunt. So we're going to all gather outside, and John Tamba is going to say, ready, set, go. And you have 20 minutes to do a photo scavenger hunt. So pick one member of your family. We're encouraging families to do this together. Teens, if you want to get together and grab a group and not be with your family, if your parents are all right with that, we get that too. But there's going to be a list on those tables. Grab a piece of paper, and it's got all these different things. Do as many as you can in the 20 minutes. And when 20 minutes is up, you're going to hear the siren go off, but we're going to tell you the end time from when we start. So do as many as you can. We're going to come back to the pavilion when time is up. No cheating after the siren goes off. And whoever gets the most is going to get a prize. So we've got some gift cards. So what we're going to do now is exit the church, but first, if you have a child that is over in the parish center, go grab your child and come back and get your bandana. So all parents who have children in the parish center next door, you can go ahead and go grab your child and meet us out front, and we won't start without you, we promise. And then for the rest of us who remain here, we're just going to give them a second to do it. Once they exit, then we can all go out and get our bandanas. So let's let them go first. And if you didn't do the temperaments test, grab a bandana that is what you think you are. So everybody should be flying their flag. All right, and we'll meet out in front of the church and we'll start our photo scavenger hunt in just a minute. What?
How do we know if we're supine if they didn't do supine?
Okay.
Never mind. I'll ask Carolyn.
No, you know why? Is this on? Yes.